So yeah, tell us more about what you want to talk about. Like, how do we get like a multi-crewed ship have a reasonably fun experience together? The mining.
Well, mining's, there are actually a number of different, occupations that will benefit tremendously from having multiple players and or NPCs, working in tandem together. So to use mining, as an example, mining is not an occupation that's completely safe. These big asteroids that you're going to be, injecting, megawatts of energy into, they contain volatile materials. They contain, compressed gases. There are a number of ways by which you can wind up, blowing these things apart as opposed to just extracting the valuable materials that you actually want to get. And so the first thing when you actually go into an asteroid field that you'd wind up doing is you'd have a dedicated scanning operator, and his entire purpose is to basically help you figure out in this vast field of thousands of asteroids which ones have a component, constitution that's attractive given what you're actually after, given what the prices in that system, warrant you spending your time trying to extract. So you've got a scanning operator. You've obviously got the beam operators, which are going to be the guys on the ship that are actually directing these mining lasers that are injecting, these injecting these beams of energy into these asteroids in order to extract fragments that a cargo loading operator would then seek to maneuver within the ship. And the way by which this works for the cargo operator is he's basically got a repulsor and a tractor beams. A tractor as opposed to tractor. They're actually a little bit different in regards to how we use them within the game. So the repulsor beam obviously just pushes something away, and a tractor beam just pulls it towards you. And so if you kind of picture looking out through your cargo hold towards an asteroid, which would be the point of view of your cargo loading operator, he would see each of these fragments as they're being blasted off, and all that he's essentially doing is, based upon the constitution of each little fragment, is he's applying a little force to basically try to maneuver it into your cargo hold or to push it away. The beam operators actually have quite a bit of work to do in regards to monitoring what's going on so that the situation doesn't get too out of control. We've got an exothermic reaction detector that monitors the amount of energy that's being produced. And what that's essentially doing is it's giving you a visual indication of whether or not the amount of energy that you'd expect to see based upon the beam that you're injecting into the asteroid is larger than what you'd expect. And what that would signal is that you're actually starting to generate chain reactions with some of these materials, and that becomes very dangerous because if you've got something of sufficient that's sufficiently volatile and has a sufficient explosive force, and you actually ignite a chunk of it, again, it's like you can blow this asteroid apart. And so you're constantly monitoring how much excess energy is being produced. You're also monitoring seismic activity. Seismic activity is very important in regards to mining these asteroids because some of these materials, kind of like nitroglycerin, it's like they're not necessarily sensitive to the injection of energy so much as vibration. And so there can be materials on the complete opposite side of an asteroid, and if you're basically shaking it, if you're breaking apart, if you're breaking fragments of sufficient size, you're causing little microtremors to emanate back and forth through these asteroids. And so the point is that the mining beam operators are monitoring the beams that are being injected to ensure that you're not going to blow the thing apart. The pilot is constantly rotating around the asteroid to find optimal locations. The scanning beam operator is basically identifying which asteroids are most attractive. The attractor repulsor, the cargo loading operator, he's basically maneuvering this stuff into your ship. You've got a refinery operator that's basically in charge of the mechanics that allow unrefined ore to be converted into pure materials that you can actually sell back at the major space stations and landing zones. And so this is just a small example of, you could do each one of these jobs yourself, but it would be extraordinarily slow compared to basically having a well-trained group of 5 players.
I mean, the idea is if you're doing it with a group, then you'll be able to harvest more and yield more. And if you're doing it by yourself, it'll just take you longer because you'll kind of have to do all these aspects yourself, and that'll just take some time.
And if
So
you're doing it by
you can do it in single player. It's just multiplayer working together as a team. You'll make more money probably.
And this is something that's true for a lot of the occupations, to where you can do it all yourself. You can run from station to station. It will be inefficient. At times it will become incredibly dangerous to do that. If you're operating the mining beam and your exothermic reaction detector spikes and it shows you, oh, look, the amount of energy that's being produced is growing exponentially, even though you've completely shut your beam off, then what that's doing is signaling you had better get out of there very quickly. And if it takes you 30 seconds to basically switch over into the pilot seat, then you've got a real problem. And so realistically, for a lot of these types of group-oriented activities, you don't necessarily have to have all of these roles filled by players. There are NPC crew members that you'll be able to hire, and of course, the quality varies depending upon what you're willing to pay them on a monthly basis. So if you wind up getting, if you get a guy really, really cheaply, then he may make mistakes. If you get a guy that's extraordinarily skilled and you're willing to, pay those higher wages, then he's going to wind up doing a much better job of guiding the really valuable fragments that are ejected, from the asteroid into your cargo hold. He's going to, the guy that's operating the refinery is going to do a much better job of actually, running a large amount of ore through your refinery in the most energy and therefore economically efficient manner possible than a less skilled player or NPC would be able to do. Say again?
They're asking if the NPCs can learn and get better.
NPCs will, the more they do stuff, they'll get better. So if you have a ship and you have an NPC that's in the turret and you survive, you win 10 battles or 20 battles, they will get better. They'll be like, basically the way the NPCs will run is they'll have very basic stats in the background, like their morale, their accuracy, those, not probably to the level you would in a full RPG, but enough that we can sort of rate the NPCs. I mean, we already do it for enemy pilots, like if you're fighting, say, the Vandal and Vandal Swarm, there's obviously the boss NPCs of a different level of skill compared to the base grunt ones. And so it would be the same, that you would basically just have NPCs that if they're your crew for a while and you happen to continue to do better, well, they sort of get trained up, so to speak. And it'll also affect, because you can, like Tony I think mentioned before, you can hire a crew member and they're cheap, but they may not be very good, or you can hire a more expensive crew member and they've obviously got higher stats.
Or you can get your friend, and basically what you'll wind up having is each one of these things, and this is actually a pretty critical point, that a lot of these occupations will, I actually call it specialization for each one of these things. So you've got somebody who is actually going to be an extraordinarily good pilot, given the flight mechanics that you're going to need to employ for this particular type of job. Same thing for a refinery operator. It's not going to be flip a switch and all of a sudden your ore gets processed. You're actually going to have what I call like a mini game. Basically, you're going to have a lot of mechanics that you need to manipulate within the game, and some players will do that better. Some of these challenges will be primarily, they will primarily require dexterity. Other ones will primarily require intelligence. Other ones will require, some combination, of those two. Another occupation that kind of like meets this criteria would be pioneer. There are a number of these occupations.
Pioneer is what Tony's calling the explorer.
Yeah, it's basically a pioneer's purpose is to discover new objects of interest. And this actually factors in with what Chris was saying earlier in regards to a pioneer would probably be the closest thing we have to, you just want to see what's out there. I don't really care to exploit it. I don't care to fight. I just want to find things. But it's interesting because it's not a one-off. It's not a disposable mission to where he just kind of lives off on his own. A lot of the game design is turning out to be very symbiotic in nature. And what I mean by that is, A pioneer's sole purpose is finding things of interest. That might be an asteroid field. Why is that valuable? Well, because after he discovers it and it becomes common knowledge, then the people that actually want to do mining missions utilize that output of a pioneer as an input for them. They need a location. They need an asteroid field at which they can ply their trade. A pioneer might discover a comet that would be extraordinarily useful as something for a scientist to research. You can, one of the examples I use is the movie Armageddon. You had the space shuttles approaching from the backside of the asteroid that was approaching Earth, and you had large fragments breaking off. And so you can picture a science mission basically needing to get a 30-second video of the backside of one of these asteroids that's throwing off all these pieces. And so the danger there is you need to be an extraordinarily good pilot. Another thing for a pioneer would also be identifying derelict ships, which would be of a lot of interest to salvagers and to people that are willing to put in the time to try to repair these things, get them back to port, and if you can actually do that, you may get a large payday. So there's a lot of attention being given to these different occupations within the game, that while there may be a lot of danger, whether that's mining or whether that's a scientist that's trying to get a 30-second video from a dangerous from a dangerous spot on a given asteroid, a scientist that's trying to get a sample of a coronal mass ejection but in such proximity that it's actually very dangerous, or trying to get precise measurements on a micro black hole. All of these things have their own dangers associated with them, but they're not of the combat variety. And so the real point there being, it's like there will be a lot of danger both on on the combat-oriented missions and on the non-combat, and it's up to the players to basically choose what they're most interested in doing.
That is a great segue and a great stopping point, because we're out of time for this panel.